This episode is brought to you in association with Powered 4 TV, so go and check them out for anything wrestling related, old events, new events when we come out of COVID, podcasts, you name it, it's all there at Powered 4 TV, so find them across social media.
Guys, I just had an amazing conversation with Stu here for Stu's Wrestling podcast. What an amazing podcast that he does, and you guys should definitely check it out.
You're listening to Stu's Wrestling Podcast. It's time for British Wrestling's sharpshooter, your host, Stu Palmer.
A warm welcome to episode 56, and my guest today is stand-up comic and the former owner of Futureshock Wrestling, which is out of Manchester, Mr. Chris Brooker. Chris contracted COVID, but he's fine, he's fit, he's healthy. He had the symptoms, but he battled on through with it, and he's fine. It's good to hear that as well. It's really good. This is where many facets of the wrestling industry in the UK, culminating in a 3-year stay, owning Futureshock Wrestling. Some great stories there. We also talk about him booking Mick Foley for the comedy tours in the UK in 2011, which sold out everywhere. Might add, I remember it being advertised. It was cool to hear from the man who set them up. He's also had Roddy Piper over, RIP Roddy Piper, for shows too. William Regal. You'll get to hear about all this and more today on episode 56 of Stu's Wrestling Podcast with the Brooker man, Chris Brooker. Enjoy. A warm welcome today to my guest on Stu's Wrestling Podcast. It's Mr. Chris Brooker, the former owner of Futureshock Wrestling. I'm a big fan, sir, by the way. I've watched your career from afar with him wrestling, and I'm a huge fan of yours. I'm a huge fan. I mean it. I totally mean it from the heart, that, Chris.
I appreciate that. It's one of those things you'll notice, especially, and you probably notice this dealing with wrestlers, but it's also very similar with comedians, a lot of performers. It's very weird when someone says, I like what you do, I've been watching you, because kind of your brain doesn't quite make that connection of what I do is in the public domain. And when someone comes up, it's like I had to, like years ago at Asda in Harper Hay, which is not the nicest place in the world. I had a guy who was on the checkout going, "I loved your comedy, mate," just as I was leaving. And it freaked me out because it's, obviously, what we do is in the public domain. But if you work in a sort of any kind of normal job, if someone comes up to you, if you work in the post office and goes, like in the bar, going, "Love your stamps, thank you." It's sincere, but it's still that little part of you where we love attention, but at the same point we're all kind of like, don't look at me. So the artist. But thank you very much.
Absolutely. Across the UK scene, mate, and funnily enough, we have met but 5 years ago, and it wasn't in the UK. I told you about this a few days ago when I was asking for a bio and stuff like nature, and I was having a photo with Spud, Mr. Drake Maverick, and you took the photo. You took the photo there in San Jose. I think it was San Jose. It was either San Jose or
Dallas.
Dallas.
Because I didn't make it to San Jose.
I'm sorry.
I didn't know the way to San Jose. But yeah, Dallas. It was that was one of those moments where, as a fan, I am very much the ape that got lucky. I have completely overachieved in terms of wrestling fandom. To sort of have those moments during the day, being lucky enough to get to know Spud, Drake, however you want to call him, and just, "Oh, do you need an extra pair of hands at WrestleCon?" He went, "Yeah." So there I was, just hanging out, and every so often you have those moments where you just go, "This is really cool." If I could go back to 15-year-old me or 16-year-old me who had just watched WrestleMania 8 and gone, at some point you're going to get a chance just to sort of play in the peripherals of this, it would have blown my mind. So, and WrestleCon, any night like that, any day like that, it's just like Last Action Hero, isn't it? In those hotels, you know, the scene where where Arnie's walking around and all these fictional movie characters are there. It's like you just stood there and Billy Gunn walks past, and obviously you just go, "You're huge," and just it was nice. It's such a heartwarming day just to be there and just be useful. And Gene Okerlund was sat next to us on one side and at one point, and Kevin Nash on the other, and Selena Vega with her tiny little dog in her handbag. It was an incredible day, and also mad that you meet people who have travelled as far as you to be there.
It's crazy.
Such a unifying thing.
Pentagon was just walking around that day in his full regalia, mate, and I'm just like, obviously it was at the height of Lucha Underground, wasn't it? And you're just like, this is incredible. It's just I was like pinching myself. I was walking about, and I've done many WrestleCons over the years, but that was one of the best. That was one of the best ones, to be fair.
It worked. It felt pretty good. It felt like everything was where it needed to be. I love the other thing that sort of Pentagon. El Penta 0M just wandering around, just normal, going, "Hey up, mate, Zero Meader, John." just like normal as anything.
Yeah.
It's
incredible.
We live in a world where we can actually get that close to the people that we go and hold in such esteem, and it's wonderful. It's easy to forget, especially at the moment when there's nothing really happening. It's easy to forget the joy of being a fan. And it's still there, and remembering it. That's got me through some pretty shit times this year. So, thank you for reminding me.
No problem, mate. No problem. It's great. I'm a fan like yourself. First and foremost, I've been since 1990. It's incredible. Chris, you've been going through some personal stuff. We spoke off camera. Now you've been in isolation. So yeah, could you speak about how that's been? Because I didn't know pre-interview. Until you told me.
Oh yeah. I won't touch the camera. I've sanitized. It's all good. It's been an interesting. To say it's been an interesting year is probably like the old Indian Native American curse. May you live in interesting times. It's when isolation hit, because my housemate went and stayed with her mum because it made more sense for them. So I spent the first 12 weeks of lockdown on my own. I didn't see another human being for 12 weeks. And thankfully, I didn't go full Howard Hughes. I didn't end up with 18-inch fingernails and jars of my own piss lined up on the shelves. Quite. I didn't have enough jars, to be honest. But the whole isolation thing, it was fine for a while. But then, so I tested positive for COVID-19 on what date it would have been, like a couple of weeks ago from today. Just a bit of a cough, felt a bit off colour, and went, you know what, I should be careful. Rang up, got one sent out, stuck a swab in my nose, which made my eyes water like you wouldn't believe. Discovered that I have a very, very good gag reflex, which precludes me from certain niche erotica work forever. And sent it off, and then got the test back like 2 days later. I have no complaints on how the process worked. I'm very lucky, considering a lot of people have really hit a wall with it. And I had to just go, right, 10 days. 10 days from start of symptoms. I stayed out of circulation for about 2 weeks, just to be sure. And I never got particularly ill. I was very fortunate, other than having a bit of a head cold symptoms and losing my sense of taste and smell, which was weird. Thankfully, it's back. But yeah, it was because I think the weirdest part was when you start to get a little bit of normality back and starting to get out and mingle a little bit, and I got to go and do a couple of comedy gigs at distanced gigs, and I got to go out and sort of meet people outside, and then just having it all taken away was a challenge. But outside of spending far too much time scrolling through Twitter and seeing the world burn and running out of milk. I should have bought a 4-pinter rather than a 2-pinter. Didn't anticipate that, did I? No. But then, to be honest, I couldn't taste it in my tea anyway. It was just like drinking hot water. So, I've been incredibly fortunate, and I've come through it okay. And I've gotten up very lightly compared to a lot of people this year. I must say, all things considered, my two industries have stopped. It's not even is it slow? No, it has fucked off completely. But I can't really complain. I've been very fortunate certainly compared to a lot of people. Roof over my head.
Absolutely.
And simple things. And I appreciate the simple things the way I didn't do like 8 months ago, 6 months ago,
I'm glad you've come through, you come through the other end with it. It just goes to show with the symptoms, doesn't it? You've had it and you've come the other side. I know obviously it affects the elderly more, doesn't it? as we're getting to know. But I'm just glad you've come through it, man.
Oh, I'm fine. And even as sort of man of my 40s, I was joking. It's like, oh, are you officially elderly there? No, I'm not elderly. I'm getting there. You know, I do complain at young people a lot, and you know, I think people who don't use their indicator should be sterilised. But other than that, I'm still a young person. I was weird. It was the first person that a lot of people knew who'd have it. So, you know, getting to talk to my little brother who got married before me and passed a driving test before me, had kids before me, going, no, I'm first. This one's mine. You can't take this away.
I want to get to, obviously you were in, you know, you were quarantined and that. What were your views on Futureshock running the shows the weekend before last? That's what I wanted to ask you first. The more current,
of course.
More of a current thing I wanted to go with first before going into the back history when you start watching wrestling. We'll go current. We'll go current with this one. I want to know your thoughts. And obviously now with the restrictions changing again since then, just what did you think about the show being run? What were your thoughts from your perspective?
Well, I will tell you, to understand how I feel about it, you've got to go back a little way here, because it's not something that the management of Futureshock, the guys who are running it now, are tremendous, and they've been involved in it longer than I have. I came in, I took it over for a little while. It's kind of how it works. You sort of pass the baton every so often. I think 3 years is quite a long time to run a wrestling company, just because however hard you think it is to run a wrestling company, it's harder. It is a full-time job in and of itself, even if you just run 1 or 2 shows a month. And it's because there's always something, it's a self-employment thing almost, because there's always something you could be doing. It just nags and it eats away at you, and it can be exhausting. And as someone who hasn't always had, you know, the best grip on the bar of soap that is my sanity, you know, it had its own kind of challenges every so often. It kept shooting off the corner of the room. So it's extremely hard. There's the process of sort of starting these shows was not something that happened 2 or 3 days before, or even a week before the shows happened. This is something that had been in place for months, and lots of preparation, lots of time, lots of research. Nothing was done as a spontaneous thing. Nothing was done as a, do you know what, we just want to run shows and we don't care what happens. Which is why it does, I will never ever tell anyone that they're wrong to feel that it is too soon to run shows, or that they do not feel comfortable going to shows, or anything. That is a decision that you make, and I have nothing but respect for it. It concerns me sometimes when people say they just want to go back to normal and do things like nothing is happening, and that couldn't be further from the truth. I've seen the level of detail. I've been part of it. I've been part of discussions, and everything was done as carefully as possible. And you can never completely eliminate risk, but it depends on the philosophy with the whole. It's part of a bigger picture as well. It isn't just wrestling. And I've seen this happen with stand-up comedy as well. And you see it in restaurants and bars, and anywhere that's trying to bring back normalcy, wherever you can. And I think it's important. There's balances. Whether we're going to flick a switch and have a miracle cure or a vaccine and we can make it all go away, which would be nice, or whether this is a gradual thing and we have to adapt, I think it's more likely to be that one. I think we're going to have to learn to live with it. And it doesn't mean being reckless. And I wasn't reckless, even though I caught it. I was wearing masks when I was out. I wasn't mixing needlessly. I wasn't taking chances. I was sanitizing, washing my hands. You know, you can only be so careful. Short from literally staying in all the time, which was starting to drive me literally insane. So when the guys at Futureshock came to me and said, we're going to do shows on this date, how do you feel about it? My initial response was skepticism. And I said, right, I'm not convinced. And then it was through the conversations of the measures in place, the distancing, the restrictions on sales, the reduced numbers, the system around the venue, because stock bookments on at Guildhall is something that there's a place at Futureshock's had a great relationship for many, many years. So being able to work with them and having everyone on board and everyone pulling together, and even to the point now, because I didn't make a big deal of testing positive for COVID, because to be honest, I don't tend to talk about a lot of personal stuff like that online. When that happened, it broke my heart, because it meant that I couldn't, even when I felt I was sniffling, I didn't leave anything to chance. I went and got tested. It was one of my main motivations for getting tested, which is because I don't want to bring that risk. I don't want to cheat the system. I don't want to break any rules. Being aware that everyone's eyes will be on you when you run a show, you have to do it by the book. You have to do it right, wherever possible. So I didn't get to go and be part of those relaunch shows. I had to sit them out, which broke my heart. And good God, it was a long day on Sunday going, I'm going to refresh Twitter and just see what's happening. So I can't tell you what happened at the show in good conscience, because I wasn't there. But I do know that everyone pulled together, the wrestlers, the staff, the people who put the ring together, all the sort of men and women that make up that team, everyone pulled together, and the fans, the Futureshock faithful, pulled together as well, and everyone played their part in making it as safe as it can possibly be. Because then you hit that point where you're trying to balance, is it the risk and reward? And you don't want to be, for so many obvious reasons, you don't want to be ground zero for problems. You don't want people getting sick, and you don't want people dying. You don't want people getting sick and having the worst possible scenario. Because I have friends and family who work in intensive care, who work in GPs, who know and have seen this firsthand, what it can do to people. So all the effort that went into it, I probably should have gone too long, didn't read, is initially I was very, very skeptical. And it took a lot of convincing and a lot of conversation. So this was never something that just happened like, should we run a show? It's not like the kids from Fame going, you know what, let's do it right here. Everything, right the way down to distancing the wrestlers from each other, sanitizing the ring, investing in supplies and making sure that it's done properly. And there was always going to be backlash, and I don't dispute that at all. Everyone's going to make their own decisions, and I will never judge anyone for it. But someone was going to be first back, and there's a point between this and obviously the speaking out movement as well. There are people who feel that it was maybe too soon to bring the shows back. Everything that could possibly be done was done, and it wasn't a spur of the moment thing. And so far, it feels like there hasn't been any sort of repercussions. There hasn't been a disaster off the back of it. In terms of the next show, touch wood, I'm fine now. Hopefully I can be part of it. But it's shifting sands at the moment, not just for, 2 weeks ago, pubs were open at 11, Who knows what's going to happen next week? But I also know that if there are new restrictions, and those restrictions make it either impossible or unsafe or unviable or even illegal to run these shows, then there won't be pushback to the point of ignorance. There won't be management going, I don't care. And that's the thing. It comes from such a place of love. You don't run a wrestling show to get rich. You do it because you love it. Once someone said, why did you take over Futureshock? And I said, one day I got out of bed and thought to myself, I have too many friends and too much money. What can I do to put that right in one fell swoop? I'll run a wrestling company. And they all bucked off. It's a labor of love.
Absolutely.
And it's natural to be suspicious of people's motivations, and healthy, I'd say, to approach anything with a dose of cynicism. But I can say, for me, from anyone involved in it, and I'm not in charge. I haven't been in charge for a while. I'm lucky that my input is valued, that my opinion is sought, and that I have a place at the table of discussion. But the motivation was, we miss this. We miss this so much. We miss doing this. We miss being a part of it. And giving a little bit when things are so bleak, and having spent 2 weeks just refreshing Twitter too much and watching the world burn, it's so crushing at the moment. And being able to do some good and give some joy back. I'm not going to go, we're Saviour, not doing this Michael Jackson Earth song. Thank us, everyone. We're doing this for the common good. I'd like to think that a lot of good came out of just giving that little bit of pleasure, that little bit of normal life, and giving the wrestlers who miss it so much, a chance to compete, to perform, to interact. I know what it meant to them, to give the fans somewhere to go, because there's nothing happening at the moment, you know, especially if you've got a family that's so, you know, how many times can you go to the park? You know, as long as they keep putting out new Pokemon and Pokemon Go, that's how that works. But that was my thing. I was skeptical. I feel that the risk and the reward kind of balanced out, and it seemed to go very, very well. I'll never say how well it went because I wasn't there.
No,
but that's
of course.
how I felt, and that's how I feel going forward. So it comes from a positive place, and hopefully nothing but positivity will come from it.
How many tickets were sold? You know what were they working on in terms of capacity for the venue? You don't know?
I couldn't tell you.
No,
mainly because like all entertainment venues at the moment, when you're selling tickets, and I can tell, like for the comedy night that I help book, it depends on how people book their tickets. So you have to block people together. So if there's a group of, say, 4, and everyone buys groups of 4, then you can have more people in a venue. If everyone books single tickets and you still have to distance, you can maybe have like a quarter of the number of people. I will say, I mean, I know that the capacity was a lot less than it normally would be. And the Stockport Masonic Guildhall, it's not the O2, it's not the MEN Arena, whatever it's called. It's a very modest, cozy venue. But even then, I think it was well below half capacity, because it had to be. So there was no fudging the numbers. There was no kind of how can we fit more people in? How can we push our luck? Hence adapting this brave new world where you run 2 shows that makes it cost effective to bring her in, because a wrestling show costs a lot of money when you start adding it all together. So yeah, I couldn't. I wouldn't want to commit to a number because I don't.
No, of course. Yeah, I just thought I'd ask you because that's fine, mate. That's fine. Now I want to get to your start in wrestling with Grand Pro Wrestling in 2009. How did that come about? We're going to go back a bit. We're going to go back a bit now, and I can't wait to hear about this. About your
back once again.
Yeah.
So 2009. So I thought I was old at the time. That's how life goes, isn't it? You go, I'm so old. And then you meet a 21-year-old who goes, I'm so old, and you want to burn them. Because no, you're a child. All right. So 2009, I was 33 years old, and a friend of mine had just mentioned, it was younger than a fellow comic, he said, oh, there's a wrestling school in Manchester. Do you want to go and look at it? And maybe we can go and learn. Because there's always that little part that goes, I want to try it. Not out of any kind of, I could be the next big thing, but just kind of, I wonder, you want to tick that box. You want to go out and experience it. And I came up with the idea at that point of just doing a documentary about a 33-year-old comic. And it was about comedy and pro wrestling, because the businesses are very, very similar. Once you get beyond the obvious kind of, to date, no concussions doing stand-up, right? But I thought, as a fan, I will go and I will learn. And I had a friend who would come and video the training sessions. And that was the plan, was to shoot this documentary. I did. I went along, and I'll, to paraphrase the great Mick Foley, the only 2 problems is that I hated it and I sucked, But other than that, it was tremendous. I've never been an athlete. I was the stereotypical pick last for everything at school in every conceivable sport. I had no interest in that kind of stuff at all. But I trained a little bit, and it was interesting. So some of the guys who were there at the time, Sam Gradwell had just started wrestling. He'd had his first match. So I got to start going to Grand Pro Wrestling and watch their shows. So it's my first, to get a feel for how it works. So going out to Hindley and sitting in the Monaco ballroom, as it was, and just being part of this British wrestling thing. Because I'd never really, I'd gone to some British wrestling years before. I used to go regularly to the Colston Hall in Bristol when All Star ran there. So that was back in the 90s. So I low-key got to see some real bangers. I mean, like Robbie Brookside versus Dave Finlay, and I got to see Giant Haystacks one time, and the Superflies, the Knights, all kinds of stuff, all kinds of amazing stuff. But it was my first time at British indie wrestling. So I ended up going on to training, and I got talking to Johnny Brannigan, and it just wasn't working out. I think what happened was a comedy promoter kind of got in my head and said, you do realize because I'd just gone full-time as a comic, and if you're self-employed, you've got no paid sick time. And this promoter, the best one in the world, said, do you know if you're hurt, you can't make a living. You could just be screwed. And and once you're worried, you can't commit. And then I think I hurt my shoulder, just a mistake. And then I thought, right, well, I can't do this anymore. So I wrapped that up. But Johnny said, would you be interested in coming and doing some warm-up? Because my sort of day job as a comic, I was an MC at the Compact. Would you like to come and do some warm-ups before the show in Grand Pro Wrestling? And I went, yeah, sure, I'll come and have a go at it. So I used to go out before Richard Parker, the ring announcer, and I would do just a little bit of cheerleading, get the crowd up, get people involved. And it was fun watching at the time because, would you believe, a small section of the fan base hated it, actively hated me. Who'd have thought it? Who'd have thought it? It's hilarious that there were people going, it does not work. This is stupid. This is shit. Why don't they realize? Like on one of the sort of wrestling forums, and I sort of read it, and it was like, so I messaged Johnny and said, are you sure this is all right? He said, yeah, because all the guys were coming up to me saying, thank you. That made such a difference to the energy at the start of the show. So, you know, it taught me a little perspective. There's always going to be people, and one hates to generalize, but it almost always seems to be when something changes. You know, there are people who dislike change or difference. And I will always hold this over Billy Kirkwood and Jim Smallman, that I was doing this shit long before they were. You know? Not as well, not good, not necessarily good. Doesn't matter. I was first. Yeah, suck it, you two. But that was an entertaining thing to watch that play out, because then when Progress launched, Jim's approach being the stand-up emceeing to ring announcing, and Billy doing the warm-up before the shows for ICW were a huge part of making them, you know something does well when people start imitating it. And there was about a year period where every ring announcer tried to be Jim Smallman and failed, because you don't have 10 years of stand-up experience.
No.
So that was my thing. I did that for a while, but I couldn't keep it up because Grand Pro, and in fact, I think it was still Garage Pro at that time, were running on Fridays or Saturdays, and they didn't have the budget to pay me what I would make from stand-up. And if I get offered a gig that will pay my bills for that week,
absolutely,
I have to take it. So it was just, I'll do it when I can. But thankfully, I got busy, so I had to tone that down. I just drifted off. So that was, I'd go to shows when I could, but it wasn't very frequent, because weekends are like our bread and butter time as a comic. In the old days, as we now call it. Do you remember them? Yeah. So a few years later, so I was talking to I stopped training, but it never leaves you. It always kind of eats away at you. It's like, I wasn't a great athlete, but I had a good sense of timing, and I was good at remembering things, and I was good at emoting, and I was good at the performance side of it, if you like. And it always kind of ate away at me. I felt like I didn't really give my best, and I never got that. I really want to have that one match. You know, I want to tick that box, right? And I was talking to my girlfriend at the time, and just sort of, it's, you know, those random little things that keep you awake in the middle of the night. And I talked to her the next day, and I said, yeah, I just kind of wish I'd kept it up, because the other actor was training at the weekend. I couldn't always make it because of gig commitments. And she said, well, why don't you go back and train again? And at that point, I was introduced to Futureshock Wrestling, who ran training during the week as well as the weekend. And all of a sudden, it was like, you know what? Why not? What's the worst that can happen? So I did. I went and trained for a while, and found myself getting back into it. And it was, for a couple of years, I trained fairly frequently, sort of as much as I could. I got to do a couple of amazing seminars. I got to train with Jay Lethal, who I got to wrestle for about 5 minutes at one point. And proof how good Jay Lethal is, that at the end I was going, oh, I can do this. I'm all right at this. I'm pretty good. Then I got in the ring with someone else, and I go, no, I am shit. He's just incredible. But and getting to do that and working with people that I've admired. So I got to train a little bit, and part of that was people often sort of, especially when you're in a wrestling company, come and go, how do I get involved? How do I get, because I think as fans, we all kind of want to be, excuse me, more than fans. There's that little part of us that would love to kind of be on the inside. and be part of it and learn and see how the cogs work. There was no shortcut for me. Right? I went as a trainee and helped at shows. I picked up litter at the end of the night. I put out chairs at the start of the night. I helped with flyering. I helped with postering. I did all the stuff that you do. I kind of, the old pay your dues cliche. So and like one weekend where I went from Edinburgh Festival where I did a sellout show with Billy Kirkwood, and it was amazing. I got to be the big star. Then got on a train the next morning at 7 to come down and put chairs out and pick up litter at Futureshock. And that's how you do it. And by being around people, they sort of trust you. They get to know you're a decent human being. Because I think, like in most walks of life, you don't get your initial breaks by being good so much as not being an arsehole. Mm-hmm. And people never underestimate how important it is not to be an arsehole, right? And then the opportunity came up to be part of the commentary team because the commentator they had decided to move on to do something else. So I ended up in the commentary booth, which I thought, this is going to be hard, but I'm a speaker. I speak for a living. I should be okay. And good Lord Almighty, it was harder than I imagined. So I had to start again from scratch, learn all of that. And then sort of did commentary for a year, got to sort of be part of some amazing stuff, like during the rise of Zach Gibson, who was really coming into his own at that point, got to call the American Wolves versus the models, Joey Hayes and Danny Hope, in a TLC match, which was incredible. Got to call matches with Nikki Storm, now Nikki Cross. Mm-hmm. Got to know people. And what was nice was being accepted and people going, oh, he wants to be good at this. And hearing people go, thank you for getting this over and making these better. But what then happened is, so Dave Rain was running Futureshock at that point, and he decided he wanted to move on. Because in fairness, he'd been running it for a long time at that point. I think he must have clocked at least 5 or 6 years. That's a long time, It's like the opposite of dog years. It's just, it's like 50 years of real time, 5 years running a wrestling company. And he said, would you be interested in taking it on? And I went, all right. And so I did. And then that became my responsibility. And I went from sort of doing the commentary and driving things to shows, because I had quite a big car. That's quite important. To booking and promoting, and that was me for the next sort of 3.5 years. And in many ways, it remains the best and worst decision I've ever made.
What was some of your highlights as owner and booking? That's what I wanted to ask you in regards to Futureshock. I know that could be very broad.
Oh,
just some of the standout moments, maybe. If not saying you're playing favourites to people or.
Oh no! It's there are moments. What for me the most satisfying part was seeing a plan come together, because I'm very much of the opinion that I've gone through my I love indie matches and I'm back to I love a story. I think that's a bit how, certainly at my age, you start off with your soft drug of WWE and it leads you to your harder drugs of all the indies and all the rest of it. A bit like, you get into Bon Jovi when you're a teenager, or when I was a teenager, and it leads you to like heavy metal and you go, Bon Jovi's a bit soft. And then you hit a certain age, you go, yeah, they actually wrote some fucking bangers. There's a reason everyone knows the words to Living on a Prayer, right? And I had a greater appreciation. I also had the chance to learn. Big part of it was learning. So getting to learn from Dave and Sam Bailey and all the other folk and who know wrestling, and learning from them about why. Because as a fan, you come in with certain ideas. You go, it should be this way, this way, this way. And then someone goes, well, okay, you give someone what they want now. Why will they come back next month? And just planning ahead. So I love to plan ahead. I love the sort of the intricacy of going, right, well, if this does this, then this does this, then this does this. And feeling a moment come together. So some of my favourite moments were like Sonna Durson and Sam Bailey's rivalry. The storyline where there were lots of little seeds planted. And if you go back, you can see that everything makes sense. The moment where Sam turned on Sonna and then he'd announced his retirement and he went and hid in the commentary booth for about 6 months in the end. And we kept them apart. We just kept pushing it until they had their match, until they had their rivalry, which led to an I Quit match. And that was my goal at the end, was it all has to be part of this story. Right? Then anytime you do something and you envision a moment, I love thinking in moments, and when the moment happens and it works, is one of the greatest feelings in the world, because it just uplifts you. Like, with the most recent example is Big Joe, who we used as a sort of, when he came in, he's always had something. This Napoleon complex guy who was an angry little man who, like White Goodman from Dodgeball, is my sort of comparison. He thinks he's a big shot, and he thinks he's clever, witty. Yeah, touche. You know. So he's as soon as I saw him, I said there'll be a point where he is the biggest babyface we've got. He will be the hero to everyone, and it was a year's build of him coming out and open challenge every show, almost every show, and just losing and getting beaten and beaten and beaten and beaten, and just gradually being broken down until we had a match where we sent out Crater as his challenger. And there's a moment where Joe body slams Crater and the place erupted. There was a standing ovation. Everyone was on their feet, and there was no faking that emotion. Everyone lost their minds in that split second, because even though we'd had this journey with Joe and we'd created this monster with Crater who had never left his feet, he hadn't bumped for years, and feeling that moment where the body slam, no one saw it coming, everyone up on their feet, even the slightly more jaded fans, you know, were just in that moment feeling it, absolutely losing their minds. Because there's a little chip on my shoulder as well going into that, because I remember reading from someone else, well, you can't get that kind of reaction from a body slam these days. And I just went, saving that for later. I am going to prove this person wrong. And you can. It was having those moments come together. Seeing beyond that, then it was seeing guys like the Young Guns, like JJ Webb or Callum Corrie or Joe or Holly Barlow, or seeing them come into their own and just grow as performers and see their confidence come in leaps and bounds, and just feeling like you helped give them that opportunity. It's like a selfless kind of thing, because if you achieve something, there's always a kind of little guilt to it, you know, unless you're a sociopath. But when someone else achieves, you can just enjoy it. So that was a huge part of it, seeing that. Seeing Lana Austin go from being quite new to wrestling, still very committed, very passionate, to where she is now, which is, I genuinely think, one of the best wrestlers in the world, and probably the most important champion in Futureshock history. And then beyond that, the opportunity to book people and interact with them. Like, I don't think I'll ever be happier than having seen Hacksaw Jim Duggan compete in a Futureshock show at the For the Love of Wrestling convention, because again, you can't fake that emotion. You can go out and create the most intricate series of moves. You can create the most jaw-dropping athleticism, but you put someone like Jim Duggan out there and he goes straight past, he hot wires you straight into your emotional center, and you cannot fail to enjoy it. You can't fail to have a smile on your face. I had set myself a goal to one day book Jim Duggan for Futureshock Wrestling when I took it over, and the stars aligned at the convention and everything worked out, and it was just every moment of that, and just getting to see Damon Lee and Joe and Big T and Thomas Wolfe and Danny Hope and Chris Egan and John McGregor all get to be in there in with him and be part of that. I had a smile on my face that practically hurt for the entire time that match was happening. And again, I've overachieved. I've been so fortunate to have so many of these moments, and I might change. I made mistakes, you know, I won't lie. I made mistakes on the way, and some of them were really expensive, but I wouldn't change it, because for all the bad, the highs were absolutely incredible. And yeah, I was just very fortunate.
That's incredible, man. It's nice to hear your personal experience, you know, being the head honcho, the pressures, but when you've got a good team behind you, from what you're saying, incredible. There you
that's the thing. With the team, if I'd had to start from scratch, I wouldn't have succeeded. The machine was there. I was just, I used to joke that I was like Ted Bundy and Married with Children. Is it Al Bundy, not the serial killer? Other Bundys are available. No, I was like King Kong Bundy in Married with Children. I was like Al Bundy. In that my job was basically to turn up and just go, here's some money, here's some money, here's some money. And I played a part and hopefully it helped. But yeah, I like to think it did. But again, we had so many good people and it's such a team effort. And that's wonderful as well, because stand-up is a very solo enterprise. And you make friends and you work together, but it's not a team effort. And every single time the team has come together, they've just blown away expectations.
I want to scoot back a little bit in time again. I want to go to 2011, and you booked Mr. Mick Foley for a comedy tour. You've booked other guys for tours, but I want to talk about Mick Foley initially, and then we'll go into the other guys you've had the pleasure of booking for the tours over the years. So, yeah, how was it? How did that come about, getting Mr. Foley, the man, the myth, the legend, and booking him for a comedy tour across the UK, Mr. Brooker?
Well, it started with a tweet, of all things. As so often these things do, you know. I'd love to say I slid into his DMs. So what happened is I was relatively late. It feels weird to say this about something that happened nearly a decade ago. I was a bit late getting into Twitter. I was very skeptical. And then a musician actually said, just look, you have a brand, go and promote it. Use it to get work. So I went, all right. So I did. And I followed Mick Foley. And he was still relatively new to Twitter at that point. And by new, his status, he only had like 100,000 followers, you know. And he was over because he was with Impact at TNA at the time, and he would come over to do a book signing tour to promote Countdown to Lockdown, which was his sort of fourth book, his last book so far. And I saw he was doing a signing in Manchester, and I went, I wonder. And he'd been dabbling in stand-up in the US. So I went, all right, let's see what I can do. So I went off and I got in touch with some various people that I knew. I went, could I get this venue from like 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock? I reckon we could sell like a few tickets and do a late show. And they came back and said, yes. So I tweeted Mick and I just said, Real Mick Foley, would you be interested in doing a stand-up gig while you're in town? Because I know people, I've got contacts, it's my business. And it was a real kind of, I still had all my notifications on because I had like 20 followers at that point and didn't know how it worked. So like 2 a.m, something was a boom. Real Mick Foley has followed you on Twitter. What the actual fuck? And then, because I was half asleep, I kind of went, well, that's kind of cool, and just drifted off again. And then it went, boom. Real Mick Foley has sent you a direct message on Twitter. And I went, they do direct messages on Twitter. Okay, and I looked at it, and he just went, drop me an email, and let's discuss it. And I did, and it became apparent that it just logistically wasn't possible, but it was that, okay, stay in touch. And we initially planned to do something in the spring of 2011. It just didn't pan out for various reasons. I think his contractual status was in flux at that point. And I went, all right, well, cool, stay in touch, and if something happens, it happens. Went about my business. And then around about August, he said, should we do this? And I went, okay. And then learned how to run a tour. That was because I've run gigs. I know how to run comedy, but I sort of reached out to friends of mine who had more experience in touring. The venues were very helpful, especially Leicester Square Theatre in London, who went, yeah, you need to charge more for your tickets. And it just kind of fell into place from there. And all the way through, my brain was kind of going whilst dealing with the logistics of running a tour. And it got to the point where the ticket was going to go on sale. And there's a real kind of, there was risk involved. There was financial risk because you have to put deposits on venues. You have to make these commitments or it just can't happen at all. And there was that, okay, tickets go on sale, 3, 2, 1. And Manchester sold out in a day. London sold out in less than a day. And because it was absolutely new, nothing like that had ever happened. And we were off to the races. And it just, the tour came about, and we sort of. I had a horrible habit of talking to wrestling legends whilst naked. This happened, unfortunately. Don't worry, I'll explain.
Yeah, you need to explain that one, Chris.
You'll see it later. In that we were sort of deposits, because obviously I paid a deposit to make sure he knew that we weren't just sort of going to be fly-by-night shysters. And it was all sort of transfers and timings and what have you. Anyway, he rang me from somewhere. I can't remember exactly what it was. My first contact with him, he rang me, and the phone went at my end at like 7 in the morning. I think he was on the West Coast in the States. So the phone rang, and it was like, oh, it's an international number. I should probably answer. Hello? And we had a conversation about like trying to sort out deposits or mail or something to do with FedEx, I think it was. And I went, oh, no, you know, you kind of wish that your first conversation with your hero is more like, well, this is rewarding. I've said cool things. He said cool things. We high-fived and the world began, you know. Instead, it was me mumbling for a bit going, I'm still kind of asleep. This is weird. Am I dreaming? And then realized, because it had been quite a warm night, I was just stood there like bollock naked going, okay, that's weird. And then it happened again when I worked with Roddy Piper. He rang me for the first time, literally as I was getting into the shower. And I got to the end and went, I've done it again. I've done it again. I didn't mention it to them. I went, well, yes, I am naked. Isn't this hot? Yeah. So it went. It just sort of happened, and I felt again it was this ache that got lucky thing. I very much fell into it, but at the same point, if I hadn't had the experience I had from stand-up, if I didn't know what I did about wrestling, it couldn't have come together. And we ended up doing 2 tours with Mick, which were just an amazing experience. Exhausting because touring is just murder. You're on the road, but I kind of like it. I kind of like being out there, and Mick was. When they say don't meet your heroes, I say pick better heroes, because Mick was a delight every step of the way, was very kind, very, very gracious with the fans, and as you can imagine, a great performer. And the fact that he chose to take a risk on me changed my life. Absolutely. I would not be doing any of the things I'm doing now without him. And it still beggars belief. Every so often there's that little part of me that just goes, go back to the guy who saw this. Even further, go back to 1992 and be the guy who watched Cactus Jack and the Dangerous Alliance take on Sting the Steiners and Marcus Alexander Bagwell on WCW Pro, you know. Go back and say, see that guy? You're going to do a stand-up tour with him. And I'd probably said, what? Stand-up? I don't want to do that. That's terrifying. So, you know, who knows where the world takes you.
Who else have you had doing the tours? I know obviously you fired some names at me for research. Yeah, just go into some of the other guys. It's quite the list. I want the listeners, the viewers, to hear about that too.
It was. So who did I work with? It was. And there's been ups and downs, right? So the next tour I did after Mick, did 2 tours with him. Brought Nigel McGuinness over with his documentary, and we did a tour with that, which obviously was a different scale to a different fan base. But again, wonderful moment in that we did a screening in London that his mum and his dad got to go to.
Wow.
And I think for them, it was really interesting to see the veneration he was held in. And I know, because his dad was quite a stoic guy, but he came up and he just shook my hand. And you know, when someone's not a hugger, but when they shake your hand, it's like, really kind of thank you so much for this. And I know it meant the world because Nigel's father passed away a few years ago now. So they had that moment together. And it was Nigel and I are now like really proper good friends, which means the world to me. Then initially, here's your trivia. We had a tour booked with Gold Dust, with Dustin Rhodes. And then he went and had a fantastic show with WWE against The Shield, and got rehired. The inconsiderate prick that he is. So we had to change that up, and that became Diamond Dallas Page. We did a tour with DDP, which again was, you don't sort of tour with someone like that and not walk away a little bit changed. So getting to work with him, then Mick had always been needling. We did a couple of smaller shows with Jay Lethal, Davey Richards, which were incredible as well. And then William Regal was put in touch with us by Mick Foley, because Mick had always said, "You're very funny. You need to do this at some point. You need to try this out." And then I got the William Regal is now following you on Twitter. Well, holy shit! There goes my day. I don't give a fuck what happens now. The rest of the day can write that off. I'm just going to take the rest. I'm just going to lie down for the rest of the day. And again, so we ended up with, like, because he was on the road with WWE at the time, I think it was 2013, I think it was 2013. So he was still on the road. He was still wrestling at that point. And he rang me, and I always remember because I was driving through Devon to a gig, and I had him on the hands-free in the car going, oh, this is Devon. They have one mast, and I think it's in Paynton. So I hope the signal's okay. And I just remember him saying, well, we've got 2 weeks. Do you think people would be interested? Do you think we could sell tickets? And I went, well, yeah, I reckon let's try it. Might as well. Do you think you can find a venue? Yeah, I will find a venue. I will build a venue, you know? If I have to build a marquee in a car park, and it turned out like the Glee Club in Birmingham, their smaller room, the studio, was available just the night after they had Raw and SmackDown at the NEC or the NIA, whichever arena it was. And I went, okay, can we do that? Smaller venue. Let's see how this goes. 30 minutes. Gone. Because, again, nothing like that had ever happened. And it just, bam, and it happened. And the show was fantastic. And one of the little side benefits of this was getting to bring other people in who I've met through comedy. Because I never knew, when I was growing up, I was like one of 2 people I knew who liked wrestling. Stand-up circuit, full of wrestling fans. Can't move for the buggers, right? To be able to reach out to people that I discuss wrestling with and go, do you want to, and I rang them and I said, do you want to support Mick Foley the first time? And they were like, ah! So getting Jim Smallman, Billy Kirkwood, other guys like Carl Hutchinson, Sam Avery, Sully O'Sullivan, and going, come and be part of this. That for me was a big part, was being able to share this amazing experience. So if you want to know who introduced Jim to William Regal, 'twas me. So the show happened and it was fantastic, and we got to do them sporadically around his schedule while he was over, and they were highlights of my year. Like I think one of the greatest shows, the best nights of my life, was at Leicester Square Theatre in London. A couple of days, I think it was the day after they had Raw and SmackDown. And we had a show. It was myself and Billy Kirkwood hosting it. We had Matt Ricardo, who's an amazing variety performer, doing the warm-up act, doing the support act. There was this guy called Dave Bautista who was sat in the audience watching, who it blew my mind, because he was, and again, it taught me a very important lesson, because there was this perception at the time that Dave Bautista was a bit of an arsehole. He was a diva. He was difficult. He was hard to work with. And so it was like, when I found out he was coming, it was like, well, this could be, let's hope he's, he doesn't have demands for like thread counts on the chairs or M&Ms of a certain color. And it was this wonderful, humbling moment when I had to nip out before the show and very politely say, excuse me, Mr. Bautista, sir, would you mind stopping signing autographs for people so we can start the show? Because he was outside doing selfies and all the rest of it. And he came and he sat in the crowd with everyone else and was just a delight, sat and watched the show and asked a question during the Q&A. And was and this was like 4 months before Guardians of the Galaxy dropped. So this is before he suddenly became a huge household name. So all the way through, I've had the joy of these little experiences that have made me kind of rethink what I thought I knew as a fan. And that's a little bonus as well. But so William Regal, and then I think the last one I really did, because we've had a few shows with Mr. Regal, was with Roddy Piper. And again, that was an incredible experience, a roller coaster, because Roddy is, it sounds like a cliche, Roddy is Roddy. He is a very strong-willed, unique human being. I couldn't have imagined trying to deal with him in 1988, 1986 or 1984. Like he would have been hard work. Yeah. And he was very spirited, had very specific ideas of what he did and didn't want to do. And by his nature was, whilst a lovely human being, was very suspicious of promoters, and I would be too if I was him. Mm-hmm. But we got to know each other a bit, and he relaxed around me. And I'll never forget, aside from the fact that the shows were mind-blowing, was the thing he was most proud of was being a dad, that his kids were his world, and just seeing the time he had for the fans. How this is someone who at one point was probably like the number 2 star in wrestling,
absolutely,
and transcended wrestling, yep. Who had so much time for all the fans and was so humble with the people that came and gave their time and money to see him, that he was a fucking nightmare as a promoter, because it was like, You can't have a 10-minute chat with everyone, mate. Come on. And he was so delightful. And there was, I'll never forget, like, the venues that had multimedia arrangements, like the Glee Club again in Birmingham. When people came in and they had their meet and greet and they went and sat down, I went, I wonder. So I went on my laptop and I found Hell Comes to Frogtown and just stuck it on the big screen. And so he was there signing for people and occasionally going, oh, you see this bit? This is where this happened. And you see this? And it's just, again, that little part of you that just goes, is this the real life? Is this just fantasy? It's, and the emotions were very strong. On the very last night of the tour, I had to make him go back and take applause. I had to go, right, go and take your appreciation, please. You know, just these people feel a connection with you. And you may have changed lives indirectly. People have been inspired by what you've done and what you've been through and all the rest of it. And he said, I don't think I'm going to come back. I don't think I'm going to be here again. I think this is my last time over here. And it was weird because it was. And then the news broke a year later, almost the day that he'd passed. And that was...
Expect him to live forever, Chris, don't you? Yeah, I mean, these people, a guy that polarised everything. And I was in the queue at WrestleMania Access the year he passed, and they were late to the signing, and we were halfway through the queue, and we just knew it was going to get cut short, and I was devastated. A couple of my mates have met him, but... Oh, just incredible, your story, man. Incredible.
Yeah. I have a bonus for you, bonus story. Okay.
Sorry, I cut in then.
Oh, no, don't worry. It's just because if I don't, I'll forget. Brain bag of soapy frogs up here. It'll just do whatever it wants. During meet and greets, again, Roddy was just a delight. He was the opposite of, you know, won't make eye contact. He was the anti-Shatner, if you like, or the anti-Adam West, if you've heard those stories of them, apparently. So what would happen is that people will request, can you put me in the sleeper hold for the photo op? And he would do it. But because he's old school, he wouldn't hurt you, but he would grab you and he would go, right there. And you would know, like, if you wanted to, good night, right? Dublin. I'm pretty sure it was either Dublin or Cork. I think it was Dublin. No, it was Cork. My mistake. Not that it really matters for this story. So it was Cork, which Irish gigs are my favourite. They're just a delight. And there was a guy in the queue, and he got to the front of the queue, and all the way through, he was a little bit boisterous and going, oh, I'm going to get him to put me in the sleeper hold. I'm going to get him to put me in the sleeper hold, all this. And fans generally kind of do the, oh, isn't this wacky thing? And no, don't do that. No, don't kind of say, oh, this is fun. And I think I wasn't privy to the moment, but I was reliably informed that when he was put in the sleeper hold, he kind of waved his arms a bit and may have accidentally hit Rod. And Roddy just went, okay, squeeze. Out like a light, literally. Because a sleeper hold is a legitimate thing. You compress the carotids. I've had, my brother does jiu-jitsu. He once put it on me to show me like half strength, and I just felt my world go, ooh, purple. He knocked this guy out. And in that split second, I went, I'm getting sued. I am losing everything. Tremendous. Can't tell you what to do, can I, Rod? Anyway, so the guy, and he looked after him, and he sort of brought him down, and then you can bring someone back, just slap on the back, and they're like back in the room. And thankfully, this guy thought it was the coolest thing that had ever happened to him. You know, I'm glad I didn't do a tour with Ronda Rousey. She pulled his arm out. Oh, sweet. Can you sign my severed arm, please? And it's just little moments like that, and just, again, so lucky to be part of it.
It's incredible, like you being so humble, but intertwining the comedy and the wrestling. That's what I've taken away, and you know, no one can take it away from you, mate. Honestly, it's incredible the stuff you've done with that. I want to go back to you when you first started watching wrestling. I've gone about this. I've gone the long way round to get to the beginning.
That's fine. We'll Tarantino this up, or you know, Tenet. I think Tenet jumps around. I've not seen it. I don't know what it's about, but there you go. Yeah. What do you want to know?
When did you first start? When did you first see pro wrestling? That's what I want to ask. Yeah.
First time. My first, actually, See, and typically for me, this isn't going to be a short answer. My first experience of watching wrestling would have been on a Saturday morning watching World of Sport when I was a little kid. I might have been 8 or 9, maybe even a bit younger. My parents didn't really have a TV when I was very young. Then we got one. Then the Saturday, I would watch World of Sport Wrestling because it came on after the kids' shows on the Saturday morning and before like the real sports, the grandstand and all the rest of it. So I'd watch World of Sport, and I remember distinctly watching Dave Finlay at the time. I remember watching him and Princess Paula coming out with what would now be termed incredibly culturally insensitive, a full Native American headdress. It's like, don't get it. Fine. It's wrestling. Go for it. And just watching that and remember some of the Big Daddy matches and just people bouncing off him. And then that came off TV and I didn't really think of it again until 1991. A friend of mine had older brothers. So he was my age, so like 15. But he had brothers who were grown up and left town. And one of them had Sky, which in those days was a bit like having your own private pool or a Scrooge McDuck vault, It wasn't commonplace, right? But what would happen is that this brother of his would record like highlight videos for him off of Sky. So it would be like Highlander, The Simpsons, and The Critic, which I still think is underrated. I love The Critic. And some wrestling. And Wrestling Challenge it would have been. I think I pieced a lot of this together in hindsight. And it was an episode where they showed highlights of a match between the Warlord and Davey Boy Smith, the British Bulldog. And the bit that got me, because before that I'd seen it, I was still kind of like video games, but I had my Sega Mega Drive. I used to get the video game magazines. I saw the reviews for the sort of wrestling games. I saw pictures and adverts, and I saw the WWF Superstars game in the arcade. But I never really kind of thought about it until I saw Davey Boy Smith lift up, and I will never forget this moment. He hit his delayed vertical suplex on the Warlord, this guy who was bigger than him, like looked like twice his size, and he just picked him up and he just held him upside down. And that blew my teenage mind. And I just went, this is insane. I can't, how is this possible? And then my friend Steve and I, we sort of bonded over this further, and he used to, because I didn't have any money as a kid. My family had nothing. We were really struggling. But he would get sort of videos occasionally. So I would get to go and watch first Survivor Series 1988 or Wrestle, because I used to drip feed them when they were released through Silvervision. And then I got more and more into it to the point that I sort of beg, borrow, and steal, and I'd have different people I knew with Sky who could record a show or WrestleMania 8. I had my copy of WrestleMania 8 that I wore out. Which was on Sky Movies. Sky Movies. Before Sky Sports was paid.
Yeah.
Channel. Back before they had the Premiership, and God knows what they showed. Probably WWF and ploughing. Just hacky sack. World Championships, and I. One of the things about nowadays is because there's so much wrestling and we can watch as much as you want. Like you've got your phone in your pocket. Oh, I can have everything WWE has ever done, and Impact, and Ring of Honor, and New Japan, and all these indies. It's all there. YouTube's full of it. When you have so much of something, it doesn't necessarily mean as much. It's still great, but it doesn't mean as much. And having it rationed, good Lord. I watched WrestleMania so many times, that one, and it had advert breaks in it, that I knew the adverts that were coming. I knew which advert was coming.
Yeah.
And I watched Tatanka versus Rick Martel over and over. I watched The Natural Disasters versus Money Inc. over and over. And none of them were winning 5 stars from anyone, but it hooked me. And then SummerSlam that year, where weirdly, of all things, all right, there was a wrestler doing an appearance. I used to live in Somerset. I grew up near Cheddar. I used to go to school there. And there was a town called Whirl, Worle, Whirl, which, to be honest, if you've never heard of it, don't blame you. It's just outside Weston-super-Mare. It's in that neck of the woods, near the coast. And they had a WWF superstar in the run-up to SummerSlam 92 doing an appearance from John Menzies. Remember that, eh?
John Menzies, yeah.
Yep, source of magazines and sweets and all kinds of stuff. So he came and did a signing, and I got to go and meet him and get a signed 8x10 and tried to take a photo, but the camera didn't work, and meet this person. And that was Hacksaw Jim Duggan, of all people. So I got to, and he was such a nice man. He was a lovely human being. And I sometimes wonder, if he'd been a bit of an arsehole, would I still be a fan today? And again, this ties back into the For the Love of Wrestling, because I got to tell him the story and show him this yellowed sort of.
It's got it.
This 8x10.
Absolutely.
The sign, it's dog-eared. It's never going to be a collectible, but it means the world to me.
Absolutely.
I got to show him this and say, you signed this for me in 1992, right? And then getting to work with him. Again, the 8 that got lucky. It's incredible. So that was my fandom, and then it just became. I got into it, and it just became comedians in monotasking. Shocker! Everything. Just give me everything I can. By 1995, 95 was the first year I really got obsessed when and sort of Diesel's sort of championship reign is off of my line, but that was my first year of. Oh my God! Went to my first live show in 1994 on my own because winner. Got my dad to drive me from Somerset to the Birmingham NEC. He went off to the pub for a bit, and I watched 1, 2, 3 Kid and IRS in the opener, and I saw Davey Boy Smith and Bret Hart versus Owen Hart and Jim Neidhart in the main, and then that was the beginning. And then what was it? So 1994, and where are we now? 26 years later,
It's incredible. I was at SummerSlam 92. I've dropped that in on the show many a time.
I wish
6
I
years
wish
old.
I'd been there.
6 years old. Got the coach from North Wales. Down we went. 2 fake on the way down, Chris. But you just can't beat it. And I also take away what you said about the internet age of it now. I would much rather go back to the times where people were taping it for us, mate. That was what I was doing. I didn't have Sky. There was a bloke in Dad's work. He was recording it too for me. It's just mad. It's mad.
I love to say, I'm going to be absolutely honest as well. As much as I like to wax lyrical about nostalgia, I do not miss having to wait 3 days. Imagine now with your fingers in your trying not to learn about it. And someone ruined the ending of Davey Boy Smith versus Bret Hart from SummerSlam 92. And that person should be dead. They said, Davey Boy won. Why you ruin things? I will wax nostalgia. I am quite fond of just going, oh wait, it's 1 a.m. Boop, there we go, it's on. I'll watch it. So favorite
match from WrestleMania 8. I'm going to ask. Now I've got one, but I'm not going to say it. I'm going to let you do yours first.
Do you want to count to 3? We'll say it at the same time, like we're on a weird first date.
I hope we're on the same line to this. I'll do it.
Let's find out.
We'll do it in unison.
Ready,
we'll do it in unison.
Okay, ready. 1, 2, 3. Owen Hart versus Skinner.
Oh.
I'm kidding. I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. Bret Hart versus Roddy Piper.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, at least we're on the same wavelength for that one. And it had great matches. But that was the one. It was perfectly paced. It was the right amount of time. You thought Roddy was going to switch back to bad guy. Had everything. Had the blood.
Oh, blood. It was, I think, as well, and again, the weirdness of getting to work with Roddy and being able to tell him this at some point, and I think it was over breakfast in a Chiquitos of all places, to go, that match, I think, was a big turning point, me going from being someone who quite liked wrestling to, this is the greatest thing in the world. And it was the journey of the match.
Yeah.
And the story, and even now, like watching TV, like the closest they're compared to now is watching The Boys, which has really got me hooked at the moment, because there'll be moments where I'm watching it and I'm so involved, I'm going, no, don't, oh, for God, what are you doing? And it was like that watching Roddy with the bell in his hand. And I'll never forget Bobby Heenan just going, what the hell? Use a bell. That's what they said. And just not wanting him to do it. And that's without knowing Roddy's history as one of the most evil men in wrestling for so many years. So, oh man, Roddy Piper and Bret Hart, shortly followed by Ric Flair and Randy Savage.
Absolutely.
And it's such interesting that for a time in the wrestling business, it was kind of not at its healthiest. There were a lot of bangers snuck away, and those two just absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, incredible.
this is like to close out now. I'm going to ask Chris Brooker's tips, and it's a generally with the wrestling business. I know you're helping people out with all facets of the business. What are Chris Brooker's tips? I know it's a broad question to ask you, but you're in a consultancy kind of role, aren't you? If we're going to say what you're helping people within the industry. So,
pretty much. I mean, what I feel like is I've had a lot. Again, it comes back to good fortune and luck, and I've been able to learn from some amazing people over the years. Getting to sit in a car with William Regal and just drive from London to Leeds and just talk the business and find his perspective. Spud, Drake Maverick, again, is someone who has such an incredible brain for this, and to be able to sit and have long chats with him, but what do you think about this? And people who are quite blunt and going, all right, well, why are you doing this? That was the thing that I learned is why? And it's similar in comedy. Why are you saying that? And if it's not helping, why are you doing it? Get rid. Brevity is the soul of wit. Make everything matter. So getting to, and sort of like being invited to go to WWE tryouts in this country just before NXT UK was launched or even conceived, to sit in on the promo tryouts and just listen to the feedback that they got from WWE, to see how that process worked, to learn and to see what they look for and to see how that comes together. So and then when I was in the States, I was lucky enough, and this again, to the pinnacle of Mount Lucky motherfucker was me getting the invite. I went over as part of a midlife crisis to the States for 3 months and went, I'm just going to travel and then see where it goes. But I started in Orlando, and I got the call from William Regal, who said, while you're here, would you like to sit in on some promo classes at the PC? And I said, let me think about that, yes. And I had to sit and calm myself down in the car park. I had to almost deep breathe and go, this is the Mecca. This is just getting in through that door is beyond anything I could have ever imagined. And I got to go in and sit on some classes with the guys running it, and it had transpired. So I stuck around rather than going. I went, if I can stay here and learn, I'm going to stick around and learn. So I stayed in Orlando for most of the time I was over there. And then one time, it transpired that Raw was in Orlando. Paul Heyman was doing 2 days of promo coaching, and I got to sit and learn from Paul Heyman for 2 days. And it was like scanners. I thought my head was just going to go, pfft. I filled 2 notepads, like big A4 notepads, thick notepads. When I say fill, I mean filled, back cover, inside, front cover, everything, right down the spine, everything. I had so much knowledge. It was an unbelievable opportunity to learn from him as he coached folk like Shayna Baszler, like the Forgotten Sons, and all this talent, Gargano and Ciampa, and just all this stuff has kind of come together, and mixing that with what I've learned from stand-up. And my biggest tip, and I always say, if anyone comes to me for a coaching session, everything I say is my opinion. There's lots of right ways to learn, and I don't claim to be the only person with answers. So everyone's got a different approach. This is mine. For me, it's based around my fundamental principle that connection is more important than content. Mm-hmm. And it's the same in stand-up. In stand-up, the best comedians with the cleverest material aren't necessarily the most successful ones. They have to care about you. You only have moments to go out there and have an audience have faith in you and confidence in you. So you look at some of the most successful comics are good comics, but they're not necessarily the best gag writers, but audiences believe in them. And as a result, they have that connection. And I think that's the case in pro wrestling. And it's about feeling rather than thinking. And the best example, and it's come along at the perfect time, everything that Roman Reigns and Jey Uso have done over the last 3-4 weeks.
Absolutely.
They've gone 0 to 60, and it's all about how they make you feel, and that we identify with it. Because with Roman Reigns, we've all been on the receiving end of someone who was sound once and is now like, hang on, you're being a bit of an asshole, but not overtly, and who says, I'm doing this for you, I'm doing this, but they're really doing it for themselves, and they're just a bit of a dick. And we've all dealt with someone who kind of goes, I want you to do well, but not too well, okay? I kind of like that you're doing okay, but don't forget, I'm better than you. And all those emotions, as we saw that play out through Jay getting his championship match, through their interactions when they teamed up, through the little bits of insincerity, the looks, it's all about feelings and all about emotion. And if you can inspire emotion and connection with the crowd, you've won. Because deep down, I think we all, no matter how knowledgeable we are as fans, we all kind of want to lose ourselves. We want to believe. We want those moments where you're on your feet because someone's body slammed someone. You know, we want to have that, oh, I can't believe you did that. Or you, sir, are a twat. You know, we all kind of want to root for someone and against someone. And I think wrestling is at its greatest. And it's not to say that you can't have amazing matches where it's two guys just going out there and being competitive. And chance of both these guys, you know, fair enough, it happens. But the greatest moments, and it is about moments, those are the things that we remember, come when you want someone to succeed and someone to fail. And that, to me, is the holy grail of wrestling. Comedy and wrestling are con tricks, basically. It's about confidence. It's about convincing people who you are and what you're about. And if you are, there's no mystery, there's no magical formula. It's just repetition, and it's just practicing, and it's knowing what you're about. And once you're confident, audiences, crowds, fans, they get confident in you, and then you can go on that journey together and you can make them feel elation. It's how I describe wrestling to someone who isn't a wrestling fan, is to compare it to Leicester City's run, because I'm not a football fan. I don't understand real sport at all. I'm half convinced a lot of it's fake. When Leicester City won the Premiership, even people who weren't Leicester City fans were invested. Even people who, you know, apart from if you live in Derby, because, you know, Derby and Leicester, rivalry. Weirdly, obsessed with sheep fucking. Leicester City went on a roller coaster, yeah, now will they, can they, will they? Oh my God, they might, no, they won't, yes, they will. Pro wrestling can create that story if you know what you're doing every 12 months, maybe even every 6 months or 3 months, and you can take people on that journey. And that, to me, is when it's absolute best. And when I'm working with someone and I'm coaching them, it's not necessarily about trying to go, this is how you do it, this is how you do it, this is the way. It's about drawing that out of them. It's about bringing that side of their personality, whether they want to be hated or loved. It's getting to the point where they can flip, they have a character, they have a personality, and it's based on who they are. They're embellished a little bit, but you can flip it. And by emphasizing certain parts, people will want to be on your side, and by emphasizing other parts. And Roman Reigns hasn't really changed. He's just changed his focus. He's just changed his direction. And the Usos, when they suddenly became popular after they turned, you know, down since day one-ish, when they became popular, they didn't really change. They just changed the way that they focused it. And I think if someone sort of comes to me for a one-to-one session, the first thing I do is I talk about what they like, who they are, what they're into, what makes them happy, what excites them, what makes them angry, who are the people that lift you up, who are the people that have maybe put you down. And it's without, I'm fully aware that it all gets a little bit legs akimbo in theatre and education, and we're all skidding around the edge of Wanker Canyon with a lot of this language. But finding your motivation, finding out what really affects you personally, it can be really hard. It can be really draining on people because they're tapping into things like real emotions. But that's how you elicit those emotions, and that's how you create these moments like Big Joe body slamming Crater, like Roman Reigns standing over his flesh and blood going, I'm the tribal chief. You do not take my place at the table. And all of a sudden in that moment, everything falls away. And it doesn't matter whether you've been a fan for an hour or you've been a fan for 20 years, you're living that moment. And that's what I want to leave it better than I found it, is the old cliche. I just want everyone to be able to tap into that and have those moments. So, you know, if you want to do that,
good context there of everything. No, I'm sure people will take that away with them. And yeah, good tips, absolutely. Right, Mr. Brooker, where can we find you in terms of social media? Where are you?
Social media. I am. It was my nickname in university when I had a column in the Student Uni magazine. The Brooker Man. That was my column. It is on Twitter. It's on Facebook. Chris Brooker comedian. If you look for Chris Brooker promo coaching, that's on Facebook as well. I am working on a website, but then so is everyone at the moment. So that'll be it. If you're on Tinder, obviously do consider swiping right. I'm good. If you're on Plenty of Fish, just kind of move on. It's just not what it was. But yeah, just drop me a tweet, drop me a DM if you're interested in maybe seeing what I can do with you. Drop me a DM, ask me a question. I'm always happy to have a chat about it. And just send me otters, gifts of otters. I like otters.
Mr. Chris Brooker, stand-up comic, former owner of Futureshock Wrestling. He's been around every facet of wrestling as well. I consider you a national treasure. I do.
Oh. I mean, in the sense that I'm dated and was taken from a foreign country that was formerly a colony, then yes, yeah, I'll take that. So
that was praise on my end.
I can't take praise. I can't handle it. So yeah, I'm going, thank you. That's what I meant to say. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for sparing the time, man. I'm glad you've got past the COVID as well in the more present times. And yeah, it's been absolutely brilliant. I've loved it. Just the humbleness from your side and what you've done, what you've achieved. It's brilliant. It's remarkable. It's remarkable from my standpoint hearing it. It was lovely, great, really good. Mr. Chris Brooker on Stu's Wrestling Podcast today. Thank you very much, sir.
My pleasure.